My name is Hulda Tolliver, and I was 41 years old the day I buried my husband. 6 hours after the burial, I was standing in my parents' front hallway in Pelham Manor, coat still damp, Julian's freight elevator key in my pocket, when I heard my mother say the word doctor. I had driven up from Manhattan to tell my parents and my sister one simple thing. Julian had left me $8.5 million and a building on Crosby Street with 6 lofts in it. I never got the sentence out. The hallway turned at the coat closet, and voices carry in that house, and my father said something about the money, and my mother answered him in the same warm voice she uses for casseroles. What I heard in that kitchen was not the worst thing that happened to me that month. 8 weeks later, 2 police officers knocked on my door at 11 at night, and my mother was the reason they came. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where the quietest people in the family turn out to be the ones keeping the receipts. If you have ever been told you were imagining things by the people who raised you, you already know how this feels. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The reception was at my parents' house because my mother offered before I could answer. That is how most decisions in our family got made. By 2 o'clock there were 40 people in a living room built for 12, and a folding table of ham and rolls, and my mother moving through all of it like water finding a drain. She refilled cups, she took coats, she told the Kellermans where to sit. My father sat in the recliner with his oxygen concentrator humming beside him, nodding at people he had known for 50 years, saying almost nothing. I stood by the window in the black dress I bought in 1 hour on Thursday. A woman from the church squeezed my arm and said she was so sorry, and then asked me if I was Adele's sister. I said yes. It was easier than the other answer. Nobody in that room had met Julian more than twice. He had been a building conservator who worked out of a loft south of Houston Street, and my parents had decided years ago that this made him a certain kind of person, and they were polite to him the way you are polite to a contractor. I had come with one sentence to say. I had rehearsed it in the car on the way up. My husband left me a building, and it is complicated, and I am going to need help with the paperwork. That was all. I wanted my father to hear it because he used to be good at forms, and I wanted my sister to hear it because she is the only person in my family who has ever asked me a follow-up question. I went to the kitchen to get a napkin, and I did not say it that day, or ever. I should tell you what I do, because everything after this depends on it. For 19 years I have been an archivist, special collections, the Verrill Library, Hendrick University, 3 blocks from Washington Square. My job is other people's paper. When a box comes in, I do not open it first. I write the date. I write the hour. I write the name of the person whose hands gave it to me, and what shape it was in when it arrived, and where I put it. Then I open it. That sheet is called a custody record, and it is the least interesting document in any collection, and it is the only reason anybody believes the interesting ones. A letter with no history is a nice piece of paper. A letter with an unbroken line of hands behind it is evidence. I have said the same thing to graduate students for 12 years. A thing is only as true as the hands it passed through. For 12 of those 19 years, I worked the Delacour bequest, 60,000 items, a family's whole century in acid-free boxes, and I knew that collection better than I knew my own apartment. I could tell you who touched any folder in it, and when, and why. I was 2 months from being named its curator, and it did not occur to me once, in all that time, that there was no file anywhere in the world with my name on the front of it. I described everyone. I had never once described myself. The hallway in that house makes a hard left at the coat closet, and if you stop there, the kitchen sounds like it is happening inside your head. I stopped because my father was talking, and my father does not talk much anymore. He said the number, 8.5. He said it the way you say a temperature. Then he said, "That is more than this whole street." My mother's voice came back low and unhurried, and she said that of course it was, and that was exactly the problem. She said Julian had been sick a long time and had not been thinking clearly at the end. She said, "Look at her, Gerald. She has not slept since February. She is living in a room full of boxes." My father said something I could not hear, and my mother said, "She cannot hold that, not the way she is, and we would need a doctor to say so, and it would have to be soon, before anything gets recorded in her name. Then, in the same breath, in the same voice, she said, and it settles the Elsa money, finally, so nobody has to have that conversation. The refrigerator clicked on. Somebody laughed in the living room. I stood at the turn in the hallway with a paper napkin in my hand and did the arithmetic. And the arithmetic was very simple. My husband had been in the ground for 6 hours. Nobody in that kitchen had asked me a single question about what he left me. They already knew the number. And they already had a plan for it. Here is the part people find strange. I walked in. I did not stand there crying in the hallway, and I did not go home and lie in the dark, because that is not what 19 years of this work does to a person. What it does is make you want the record. So I came around the corner into my own mother's kitchen and set my cup in the sink and said hello, and they turned to me with two completely untroubled faces. My mother asked if I had eaten. I said not yet. My father looked at the window. And then I asked the only question I had, and I asked it as flatly as I could, because I wanted to watch his hands while he heard it. I said, "Who were the trustees on Grandma Elsa's trust?" My father's hands were on the arms of the kitchen chair, and they closed. Not fast, the way you close a drawer you did not mean to open. My mother laughed, a short, warm laugh, and said, "Honey, that was 20 years ago, and today of all days." Then she came over and put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed, and she said the thing she has said in one form or another my entire life. "Nothing in this family was ever only yours." She meant it kindly. That is what I need you to understand about my mother. She meant it the way other people say grace. I went out to the car and I sat there with the engine off, and I did what I do. I wrote down the date. I wrote down the hour. I wrote down the sentence, word for word, and the name of the person who said it. You should know what $8.5 million actually looked like, because it is not what my parents pictured. Julian bought 41 Crosby Street in 1994, when the ground floor was a print shop and the freight elevator ran on a rope you pulled. 6 loft units. Cast iron front, wooden gates on the elevator, a roof he patched himself every spring. The appraisal after he died put the building at $7.2 million, and the rest of the estate was insurance and a checking account and a truck. So the number in the headline was real, and almost none of it was money. What it was, legally, was an interim multiple dwelling under Article 7C, the Loft Law, which means the building is still working its way through legalization with the city, and there are deadlines attached to that with real teeth. There was a bid on my desk for a second means of egress, a fire stair, at $460,000. There was an estate tax return due in 9 months. There were 6 tenants, one of whom, Ilse Brandt, moved into the 3rd floor in 1978 and has bound books there ever since, and whose rent is protected by the same law that fines me. I inherited a legal obligation with a roof on it. I sat at Julian's drafting table that first week with the loft board correspondence in front of me, 40 years of it, and I did what I know how to do. I put it in order. That was the last week of my life that anything went in order. My sister walked me out to the car that night. Adele is 5 years older than me, and she has the same voice our grandmother had, low and a little scraped. She held the door and asked how I was sleeping, and I said not much, and she nodded like she already knew. Then she said, "Mom says you have been up all night in that apartment." It was such a small thing, but my sister does not repeat other people. She has never once in her life said a sentence that came from our mother. She said it looking at the driveway. So I asked her when they had talked about me, and she said, "We all talk about you, Hulda. You just moved away and stopped noticing." I let it go. I drove her home instead of letting Ray come out for her. 10 minutes. New Rochelle, a split level with a ramp Ray built himself. Wyatt was 15 then. He has a seizure disorder that 4 medications have not fixed, and their kitchen table is where the insurance paperwork lives, in 3 stacks, held down by a coffee mug. Adele moved a stack so I could put my bag down. She apologized for the mess. I told her the truth, that it was the most organized filing system I had seen all week, and she laughed for the first time that day. Driving back down the hutch, I kept hearing it. "Mom says you have been up all night." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened?" My mother had already written a sentence about me and handed it to my sister, and my sister had carried it to my car without noticing the weight. My grandmother Elsa sold her two-family house in the Bronx in 1996 and put the money in a trust for me. I was 11. I knew it the way children know things, as a fact with no edges. There was money for school, and my parents handled it. And when I turned 35, my mother told me it had gone to tuition and to my grandmother's care, and handed me a check for $18,000 and said, "That is what is left." And I said, "Thank you." That is the sentence I have had to live with. I said, "Thank you." So on the Monday after the funeral, I called the bank that swallowed the bank that had held it, and a very patient woman named Dolores put me on hold twice, and then told me the account closed in 2020. I asked what documentation they had. She said there were annual beneficiary receipt and release forms in the file, signed each year by the beneficiary. I asked her to spell the name on the signature line. She spelled mine. And then I remembered every one of them. Thanksgiving, the good tablecloth, my mother with a pen and a manila folder, saying, "Sign this so your grandmother's estate does not get penalized," and me signing between the pie and the dishes, twice while wearing oven mitts. I had asked once in 2011 and once in 2016. Both times she brought me a printed page with a single number on it, a balance. I am the person who teaches graduate students that a number without a ledger behind it is not a record. I took a balance from my mother twice and went back to work. She came to Crosby Street on a Thursday, with a casserole dish wrapped in a towel and a folder under her arm. My mother has never once called before coming. She stood in the freight lobby holding the dish while I brought the elevator down, and she looked up at the gates and said, "This is a fire trap, honey." Upstairs, she put the dish on the stove and turned in a slow circle. My apartment is the top floor, and it is one room, and after Julian died, I had pulled everything out of his flat files, 40 years of drawings, and I had it in boxes along the north wall while I sorted it. She looked at those boxes for a while. Then she sat down and opened the folder and slid a page across. Family Asset Management, it said at the top, in a font from a template. Under it was a power of attorney, durable, with my name typed in, and her name typed in, under agent. She said, "This is just so I can handle the phone calls while you are grieving." I said no. She said it was not a big thing. I said no again and got up to make coffee, because I have found that the second no lands better if your back is turned. She stayed 40 minutes. She admired the ceiling. She asked what was in the boxes, and I said drawings, and she said, "All of them?" And I said yes, all of them. When she left, she counted the boxes with her eyes on the way to the door. I saw her do it, and I thought she was being nosy. I want to be honest with you about that. I saw her do it, and I thought it was nothing. The next week, Coleman Fry called me into his office and told me the appointment was going to the board in the fall. Curator, Delacour Collection. He is a decent man with a bad back who has run the Verrill for 9 years, and he was genuinely happy, and he had the deed of gift on his desk because he wanted to show me something. The Delacour family gave us that collection in 1998 with conditions, the way old families do. One paragraph names a custodian of record, a single individual, by name, responsible for the chain of custody of every item, and the paragraph says the custodian must be a person of full legal capacity, with no pending proceeding concerning capacity or the management of their affairs. Coleman read it out loud and laughed and said, "In other words, do not lose your marbles." I laughed too. I want you to understand how boring that clause was to me. It was weather. It was the kind of language that has sat in deeds of gift since before I was born, put there by lawyers protecting a dead man's furniture. I had read it 100 times. I had cited it in a conference paper. I went back down to the vault that afternoon and pulled folder 112 out of box 9 and signed the sheet with the date and the hour, the way I have signed it since I was 22. I did not think about that paragraph again for 6 weeks. Somebody else was already thinking about it. I did not confront anybody. I want to be clear about that, because people always ask why I did not just call my mother and have it out. I do not work that way, and it would not have worked. What I did was take a personal day and go to the Bronx County clerk, and then to surrogate's court, and pull my grandmother's file. It took 4 hours and $11 in copy fees. Elsa Tolliver sold the house on Bogart Avenue in April 1996 for $286,000. 2 weeks later, she executed a trust. I read the instrument in a plastic chair under a window that had not been washed since the war. Trustees: Gerald Tolliver and Marlene Tolliver, jointly. Principal distributable to the beneficiary at age 35. And the beneficiary, on the line where a grandmother with 2 granddaughters gets to make a choice, was one name. Mine. Not Adele. Not both of us. Me. My grandmother took every dollar she had in the world, and she did not leave it to her son, and she did not split it, and she put it behind a door with a lock on it and gave the key to the 2 people I later learned had asked her for money 3 times. I sat in that chair for a long time with a certified copy in my lap. I had been told my whole life that my grandmother was difficult. Now I was looking at the shape of what she had been difficult about. I went to Adele's on a Sunday, and we sat in her kitchen with the insurance stacks pushed to one side. I asked her about 2001, the spring she left the community college, and she told me the whole thing without any drama in it. Grandpa fell in February. Nana could not lift him. Somebody had to be there 4 days a week, and Mom was working, and I was 20 and taking 2 classes. She shrugged. She said, I was going to go back in the fall. Wyatt came through and put his head on her shoulder for a second and left, and she watched the doorway after he was gone. Then she said the thing I have not been able to put down since. You got to leave. Somebody had to stay. She did not say it as an accusation. That is the part that got me. She said it like a weather report about a country she lives in. I asked, as lightly as I could, when they bought this house, and she said 2004. And that Mom and Dad helped with the down payment, and that it was $61,000, cash, and that Ray still says it was the luckiest year of his life. I nodded and drank my coffee and said, that was wonderful. If you are listening to this and you have money somewhere with your name on it, a trust, a policy, an account your parents opened for you, pause this and go ask for a statement. Not a balance, a statement. I waited 20 years to ask, and I am still paying for it. Tell me in the comments if you get one. I caught my father alone once. It was a Saturday, and my mother was at the 11 o'clock service, and he was in the garage with the door up, sitting in a lawn chair among the paint cans with the oxygen line over his shoulder. He used to sell dental supplies to half of Westchester, and he could do a mortgage amortization in his head. He is 74 and he gets short of breath, saying 2 sentences in a row, so he says 1. I sat on the cooler. I asked him whether he remembered signing the trust. He said yes. I asked him whether he had ever seen a statement for it. He looked at the driveway for a while. Then he said, your mother never liked her. Meaning Elsa. He said Elsa had come to this house in 1996, after the closing, and sat in the front room and told him something, and he stopped there and worked on his breathing. I waited. My father is not a cruel man. He is a man who has spent 50 years choosing the smaller argument. Finally, he said, she told me to keep the statements where Marlene could not get them. And I said, did you? And he lifted one hand off the arm of the chair, an inch, and put it back down, and said the only completely true sentence anybody in my family said to me that entire spring: your mother handles the paperwork. Then he asked me if I wanted a soda. I said yes, and we sat there, and neither of us said anything else, and I have thought about that inch of his hand more than I have thought about almost anything. That night I could not stay still in the apartment, so I did what I had started doing after Julian died. I went down and got in the freight elevator. It is a wooden car the size of a small bedroom, with a folding gate you pull down by a leather strap, and it runs slow enough that a trip from 6 to the lobby takes almost a minute. It is the only place in that building where nobody can hear you and you cannot hear them. I wrote it down. On 3 the gate rattled, and Ilse Brandt was standing there in a cardigan at midnight with her reading glasses on her head, because she is 83 and sleeps 4 hours like all serious people. She got in. She rode with me. She asked if I had eaten, which is apparently the only question anyone asks a widow, and then she told me she had kept the elevator log since 1978. Every delivery, every load of paper, every time the car went out of service. 40 years of it in composition books on a shelf in her workshop. I asked her why, and she said, because when they tried to empty this building in 1981, the only thing the city believed was the book that never had a gap in it. She said, people do not believe what is true. They believe what is continuous. I rode up alone after she got off. A thing is only as true as the hands it passed through. I had been saying that to other people for 12 years. Somewhere between 3 and 6 that night, I decided I was going to start keeping the chain of custody on my own life, every hour, every hand. So I went to work on it the way I would go to work on a donated estate. Not with a theory, with requests. I wrote to the successor bank and asked for certified copies of every statement, every check image, and every instrument of transfer on the trust account, and I paid their research fee, and I did it in writing so the request itself would have a date on it. I asked the tax service for copies of the trust's fiduciary returns as a beneficiary. I pulled the mortgage history on my parents' house from the Westchester County clerk, which anyone can do for free, on a public terminal, in an hour. And then I made a table. 3 columns. Date, amount, hands. It took 11 days for the first envelope to come. When it did, I sat on the floor with the pages fanned out and matched them against the column on the left. And the matching was not hard, because whoever had been moving that money had never expected anybody to look. October 2004, $61,000, drawn to cash. My sister's down payment. June 2009, $95,000, wire out, 4 days before the refinance on the house in Pelham Manor closed. A run of small payments from 2013 to 2017 to a hospital billing office in Valhalla, and every year from 2011 to 2020, on the same week in November, a management fee to the trustees. My grandmother left me $286,000. I could account for $74,000 of it going to my tuition. I sat there with the rest of it laid out on the floor in my husband's handwriting light, and it was the cleanest ledger I have ever built, and it was mine. On the 12th of May, my mother came to the library. She was wearing the good coat. She did not come to my desk. She went to the reference counter on the second floor and asked for the director by name, and when Coleman Fry came down, she took both of his hands in hers and said she was so grateful for everything the university had done for her daughter. I was 10 feet away with an open box on a cart, and there is a rule about that box, which is that it does not get set down anywhere except a table with a signed sheet on it, so I stood there holding it. She said, "We have all been so worried about her since the funeral." She said, "She is not sleeping, she is living in a room full of boxes, she says things." She said it in the voice a person uses when they want to be overheard and want to be able to say later that they were whispering. Coleman looked at me. He looked at me the way you look at a car alarm going off across the street, mildly, and then a second time, differently. My mother turned and saw me, and her face opened up with delight. She said, "There she is." She hugged me with the box between us. She smelled like the same perfume she has worn since 1994. She left in under 6 minutes. She did not need anybody in that building to believe her. She only needed the sentence to exist in the ear of a man who has a university lawyer standing behind him. I put the box down on a table with a sheet, and I signed it, and my hand was steady, and I want credit for that. I had slept under 3 hours a night for most of a week. That is true, and I am not going to hide it from you because they did not have to invent very much. Julian's flat files were the last of him I had not touched, and I had been going through them at 2 and 3 in the morning, and I was living on toast. That Wednesday afternoon, Adele called about Wyatt's neurology appointment, and at the end of it, she asked how the building was going, and I said the fire stair bid was $460,000 and I was tired of all of it. I said, honestly, I want to be done with all of it. I meant the building, I meant the loft board and the egress and the lawyers. My sister said she understood. And she did. At the time. At 11 that night, the intercom buzzed and there were 2 police officers in the lobby, very polite, very young. They said they had received a report about my welfare. They said a family member had called and expressed concern that I might hurt myself. I brought them up in the freight elevator because it is the only way up. They stood in my doorway and looked at a woman in a cardigan at 11 at night, in one room with 40 boxes stacked along the north wall and a dead man's drawings on every surface. I asked if they had a warrant. The older one, who was kind, said they did not need one for this. He said, "Ma'am, we just need you to come get checked out, and then you can come home." The psychiatric emergency room at Harlan Medical Center is on the ground floor, and the doors lock behind you with a sound like a stapler. A woman in scrubs took my bag, my belt, my shoelaces, and Julian's freight elevator key, and put them in a plastic bin with a number sticker on the side, and I read the number and repeated it to myself twice, because that is what I do with a bin. Then I sat in a molded chair for 5 hours. A staff physician came and asked me questions. Had I been sleeping? No. Had I been eating regularly? Not really. Had I recently experienced a loss? My husband died on the 9th of March. Had I said that I wanted to be done with all of it? I said yes, and that I had been talking about a fire stair that costs $460,000. He wrote for a while. He asked if I felt safe. I said yes, calmly, in my normal voice, the same voice I use to tell a researcher he cannot bring a pen into the reading room. I found out later what he wrote about that voice. Flat affect, recent bereavement, poor sleep, disorganized living conditions per family report. I asked for the mental hygiene legal service and he said someone would come by, and someone did. Eventually. And she was good. Under Section 939, a hospital can hold you for observation, and after 48 hours they cannot keep holding you unless a second psychiatrist agrees. Nobody was lying. Nobody was corrupt. The machine was working exactly the way it is designed to work, on information my mother had given it. My mother came on the second day during visiting hours with a cardigan folded over her arm because she had decided I would be cold. She was wonderful with the staff. She thanked the nurse by name. She said, "We have been trying to get her help since her husband passed," and the nurse's face did the thing faces do, and I watched a stranger revise me in real time. Then she sat down across the little table and put the cardigan between us and said, "Honey, this does not have to go any further." She said, "Come home for a while. Let me and your father handle the building and the estate and all of it." She said, "Come home, and none of this has to be in writing." I asked her one question. I said, "Who called?" She did not blink, and she did not lie. My mother has never once lied to me, which is a strange thing to say about a woman who did all this, but it is true, and it is the most frightening part. She said, "I did." She said, "I did what a mother does." And then she reached over and put her hand on my wrist, on the paper bracelet with my name printed on it, and she said it again, the way she has said it my whole life. "Nothing in this family was ever only yours." I looked down at her hand on the bracelet. That bracelet was the first document I had ever been issued with my own name on the front of it, and my mother's hand was covering it. A second psychiatrist examined me on the second day, and he confirmed the finding, which is the part I did not expect. That is what the statute requires inside the first 48 hours, and once he signed it, the hospital could have kept me for 15 days. I did that arithmetic while he was still writing. Then, on the third morning, the unit psychiatrist came. Her name was Dr. Aurelia Vance, and she had a coffee stain on her badge, and she talked to me for 50 minutes. She asked what I did for a living, and I told her, and she asked what a custody record was, and I explained it, and she wrote something down. At the end, she asked whether I wanted to hurt myself, and I said no. She asked whether I ever had, and I said no, and that in 25 years the worst thing I had ever done to myself was work weekends. She wrote that I no longer met the standard for retention. They let me out at hour 68. A woman in scrubs brought the plastic bin, and I checked the number sticker against the number I had been carrying in my head for 3 days, and it matched, and I signed for my belt and my shoelaces and Julian's key. Then I walked from the hospital down to Crosby Street in the 6 o'clock light with my shoes untied, because they had kept the laces in a separate bag. That is what people do not understand about this. Nobody in that hospital did anything wrong. Two doctors were careful, the lawyer showed up, and they discharged me the morning I stopped meeting the standard. And none of it mattered. Because the only thing that machine produces, win or lose, is a record. That record existed now. It had my name on the front of it, and I had not written a word of it. I rode the freight elevator up and pulled the gate back, and the first thing I noticed was that the apartment smelled like lemon cleaner. The floor had been mopped, the dishes were done, and the north wall was empty. 40 boxes. Julian's flat file drawings, the loft board correspondence going back to 1981, my grandmother's file, my table with 3 columns, the certified bank pages I had spread out on the floor 11 days earlier. All of it. I stood there in my untied shoes, and I did the only thing there was to do, which was to walk the perimeter of the room and write down what was missing, in order, with the time. Then I called my sister, and Adele picked up on the first ring, and she said, before I said anything, "I know." And I said, "You let her in." She said Mom had a key from when Julian was in the hospital, and she said the place was a health hazard and that somebody had to clean it up before the police came back. She said it was for me. She was crying. I asked where the boxes went, and she said storage, and that Mom said it was for safekeeping. I have had that phrase read to me off 100 donor agreements in my career, and I have never once heard it mean what it says. Most of it came back eventually. Not all. The 1996 trust instrument with my grandmother's signature on it, the original, the one I sat under a dirty window to read, never came back. I am an archivist. They took the originals. And here is the thing they did not know, which is that Ilse Brandt's elevator logs were in a workshop on the 3rd floor, and my mother had never once been in that workshop. My badge stopped working on a Tuesday. I swiped it at the vault door on the 2nd floor, and the reader gave me the short red blink it gives to undergraduates. I swiped it twice more, which is a stupid thing to do, and I did it anyway. And then I went upstairs, and Coleman Fry was already standing in the hall waiting for me, holding a piece of paper he did not want to be holding. University Council had received notice. Not from me. My parents' attorney had served the petition on the estate and on the university, because I am the custodian of record and the collection is an asset the court might want to know about. And so Hendrik found out that there was an open proceeding concerning my capacity before I did. Coleman read me the paragraph from the deed of gift. He read it in a voice like a man reading a eulogy for someone he liked, a person of full legal capacity with no pending proceeding concerning capacity or the management of their affairs. He said, "Hulda, it is not a judgment." He said, "It is a pause." He said he was sorry 3 times and he meant it every time, and he took my badge and put it in an envelope and wrote the date on the envelope, because he is a librarian and that is what we do. 12 years. 60,000 items. I knew where every one of them was. I stood in the hallway outside the vault I built, and I could not open the door. I know some of you are hearing this and thinking that could never happen to you. That is what I thought. And I am the one who does this for a living. If somebody in your family has started telling other people that you are not doing well, write down the date. Just the date. Subscribe and stay with me, because this is where it turns. The petition itself is a beige document with a blue backer, and it is the politest thing I have ever read. My parents were petitioning under Article 81 of the Mental Hygiene Law for the appointment of a guardian of my property. They asked, in the alternative, for a temporary guardian to preserve the estate pending the hearing. The judge signed an order to show cause and set a date 26 days out and appointed a court evaluator named Dennis Yardley to investigate and report. Attached were photographs of my apartment. Somebody had taken them from the doorway, and in them the north wall is stacked with boxes, and it looks exactly like what my mother said it looks like. There was an affidavit describing my behavior since the funeral. It said I had been hospitalized. It said I had removed and concealed family documents. And it gave the number of boxes along the north wall exactly right, counted by somebody standing in that room with a casserole dish in her hands. Frances Boyle is the lawyer I hired, and she is direct in a way I appreciated. She said, "They are not going to win this." She let that sit for a second, and then she said the rest of it. she said. Hulda, they do not need to win. She explained that a petition is a public filing, and a hearing is a public proceeding, and that from the day it was signed until the day it ends, I am a person with an open capacity case, and every institution I touch will treat me accordingly. She said, the damage is not the verdict, the damage is the docket number. My mother called me 8 days later. She was gentle and she was quick, and it was the best offer anybody made me all year. She said, none of this is what I wanted. She said, come home. She said, we will withdraw everything tomorrow, and there does not have to be a court date or a hearing or any of it, and you can stay in your old room while we sort out the building, and Hulda, nobody ever has to know. I sat on the floor of my apartment with my back against the empty north wall, and I understood the offer completely. It was not a trick. It was the actual deal my family had been offering me my whole life, stated out loud for the first time. Be looked after and be quiet, and nothing gets written down. I said no. Then I hung up and did 2 things I could not take back. I requested my complete hospital record from Harlan Medical Center, all of it, the intake note, the physician findings, the observation flow sheets, in my own name. And I filed a petition in Surrogate's Court in Westchester County to compel an accounting of the Elsa Tolliver Trust, naming Gerald Tolliver and Marlene Tolliver, trustees, as respondents. Francis filed it Thursday morning. I paid for certified mail with return receipt because I wanted the green cards, and I walked them to the post office on Prince Street myself, and I stood at the counter and licked the stamps like it was 1996. There is a version of me that stopped there. She is not the one telling you this. When the clerk stamped the receipts, I understood that the job I had held in that family for 41 years, the quiet one, the one who kept the peace, had just been eliminated. Here is the thing my mother did not know about the work, and it is the only advantage I have ever had over her. Taking the originals does not destroy a record, it never has. Authenticity does not live inside the object, it lives in the line of hands the object passed through, and that line is almost always written down somewhere else, by somebody who had no idea they were writing it. So I rebuilt it without a single piece of paper from my own apartment. The successor bank sent certified copies under seal, because a bank keeps its own custodial copies, and does not care whose mother has a key. Surrogate's Court in the Bronx had the estate file for Elsa Tolliver, including the trust instrument, because it had been filed there in 1996 by a lawyer who has since died. The Bronx County Clerk had the deed for Bogart Avenue. The Westchester County Clerk had the 2009 refinance on the house in Pelham Manor, recorded. Public. Indexed by name. The hospital billing office in Valhalla confirmed the account the 2013 payments went to, and Francis subpoenaed the self-storage facility in Mount Vernon because a unit rented in May had to be rented by somebody, and storage companies keep intake receipts with a driver's license number on them and a timestamp printed by a machine that has no opinion about families. It came back on a Friday. Unit 1140. Renter, Marlene Tolliver, with her license number. Contents delivered by 2 movers. Intake, 2:14 in the afternoon, on a Thursday in May. I sat down with that receipt and with a copy of my own observation flow sheet from Harlan Medical Center, the one where a nurse initials a box every 15 minutes, all day, for 3 days. 2:14 that Thursday afternoon has a set of initials in it. Mine is the only alibi in this story, and the state of New York wrote it. Dennis Yardley is 60, wears a raincoat indoors, and has been a court evaluator for 19 years, which is exactly how long I have been an archivist, and we both noticed that in the first minute. He is not on anybody's side, and he wants you to know it. He interviewed Coleman Fry. He interviewed 2 of my colleagues, including one who cried, which I only learned later. He interviewed the superintendent who services my building, and Ilse Brandt, who told him about the elevator log and then made him sit down for coffee. He called Julian's cardiologist and asked what I had been like during the last month of my husband's life, and the cardiologist told him I had brought a binder to every appointment with the medication changes in a table, and that he had wished all families were like that. Then Yardley came to my apartment and sat in Julian's chair with a legal pad. He asked about the boxes and about the hospital, and about the fire stair. He asked what I intended to do with the building. I said keep it, legalize it, and not evict an 83-year-old bookbinder. He wrote that down. And then he took his glasses off and looked at the empty north wall and asked the only question in 4 months that I could not answer. He said, Ms. Tolliver, you have described other people's lives for 19 years. He said, your husband's medications, your grandmother's estate, 60,000 items belonging to strangers. He said, why is there no file anywhere with your name on it? I opened my mouth. Nothing came. He let it be quiet for a while, the way people do when they have done this for a long time and have learned that silence is a question too. Then he closed the pad and said he would have his report in by the 9th. I did not sleep that night, and it was not the petition keeping me up. 60 Center Street has a rotunda and marble stairs and long wooden benches in the second-floor hallway that were built for people waiting to have their lives decided. My mother was sitting on one of them at 9:30 with her purse in her lap and her ankles crossed. She had done her hair. She patted the bench and I sat down, because I wanted to know what she would say, and because she is my mother, and I was tired. She talked about the weather. Then she said, out of nothing, my father died in 1979. She said her father had a house in Yonkers and a passbook account and a little insurance, and that her 2 brothers handled it, and that she signed everything they put in front of her at a kitchen table in one afternoon. She said, I never saw a statement. Not one. In my whole life. She said, I signed what they put in front of me, and nobody ever asked me if it was mine. She said it looking straight ahead at the opposite wall. I want to tell you that I felt nothing. What I actually felt was the floor drop, because I could see the whole thing at once. A 19-year-old girl signing at a kitchen table, and a 40-year-old woman with a manila folder at Thanksgiving, and me between the pie and the dishes with a pen in my hand. 3 generations of women signing paper nobody explained. I said, Mom. I said, I know. And she turned to me and her face was completely composed and she said, then you understand why this is not a thing you take to court. She stood up. She smoothed her collar. She said the lawyers had worked something out, and that I should listen carefully, because it was very generous. And then she walked toward the courtroom doors without waiting to see if I was following. They put us in a conference room with a scarred table and one window. My parents' attorney did the talking. The petitioners would withdraw the Article 81 petition with prejudice, which means they can never bring it again. Both sides would jointly request that the entire file be sealed, the petition, the affidavits, the photographs, the evaluator's report, and every reference in it to 3 days at Harlan Medical Center. In exchange, I would withdraw the accounting petition in Westchester and sign one final receipt and release on my grandmother's trust. Everything disappears. On both sides. Frances Boyle leaned over and told me to take it. And she was right. And I want that on the record too, because she is a good lawyer and it was good advice. A sealed file is a file that does not exist. Coleman Fry had texted me at 8 that morning, a short line about counsel's position, and the position was that, if the proceeding ended and the record was sealed, the custodianship stood, and the curator appointment could go to the board in the fall as planned. 12 years, 60,000 items, my name in the paragraph. And then the door opened and Adele came in, and she had been crying in a bathroom, and she said, please. She said the accounting was going to name her. $61,000 in 2004, and she had found out in 2018, and said nothing. And if a court put that in an order, she and Ray would have to sell the house, and Wyatt would lose the district with the nurse in the building. She said, Hulda, please. Then she said the other thing, the one she has been saying to me since we were girls, and it did not sound like an accusation this time either. She said, you got to leave. Somebody had to stay. The clerk opened the door and called our case number. I asked for 2 minutes. I stood in the hallway by the window with the whole thing laid out in front of me like a finding aid. Seal it. And I keep my name, my vault, my collection, my sister, and the truth goes in a drawer that nobody can ever open. Refuse, and every one of those goes, and one thing survives. I had spent my entire working life explaining to people why a gap in a record is worse than a bad record. I had never once been the gap. So I went back in and I said no. I said I would not consent to sealing any part of it. And then I did the thing that Frances still brings up, because it was not in her plan and I had not warned her. I said I would be putting my complete hospital record into the file myself. Unredacted. All of it, the intake note, the flat affect line, every observation sheet, the whole 3 days, filed by me, in my own name, in a public court file, permanently. If it was going to exist, it was going to exist with a provenance, instead of a rumor attached to it. And I said I would not redact my sister's name from the ledger, because a chain with a link blacked out is not a chain. Frances asked me if I understood what I was giving up. I said yes, out loud, so that I would have said it. My mother stood up then and told me I was going to destroy this family over a number from 20 years ago, and I told her something I should have told her at that kitchen table with the pie. I said, "You are right. Nothing in this family was ever only mine. That is what I am fixing." Adele got up and walked out to the hallway. She did not look at me. I let her go, and I went into part 25. Part 25 is a small room with a high ceiling and a ceiling fan that wobbles. 9 people. My father wheeled his oxygen in and the wheels ticked on the terrazzo the whole way. Ilse Brandt came and sat in the back row next to my sister's empty seat, and to this day I do not know how she found out the date. Their attorney went first and did it properly. Bereavement, sleeplessness, the hospitalization, the photographs, the removed documents. Then I was sworn. And I did not argue about whether I was well, because you cannot prove that. And anybody who tries in a courtroom looks exactly like what they are accused of being. I authenticated documents instead. That is the whole job. I laid the foundation for the certified bank copies, the recorded deed, the surrogate's file, and the refinance. And then I put in 2 pieces of paper side by side: the storage intake receipt from Mount Vernon, Unit 1140, renter Marlene Tolliver, license number on the line, machine stamped at 2:14 in the afternoon on a Thursday in May. And the observation flow sheet from Harlan Medical Center for that same Thursday, where a nurse had initialed a box for me at 2 o'clock and again at 2:15. I said, I could not have concealed those documents. I said, I was in a locked unit, and the state of New York was writing down where I was every quarter hour. A thing is only as true as the hands it passed through, and I could show the court every hand. My mother said, "That is not fair," out loud, while the judge was speaking. She said it twice. The judge asked her attorney to control his client, and my mother sat back down, and her mouth was a line, and I never once raised my voice. The court